welcome to a very special episode of the One Girl Revolution podcast on International Women's Day. As a part of our continuing coverage of Women's History Month, we wanted to take this opportunity to share this very special episode where I share some behind-the-scenes stories of One Girl Revolution, how it's evolved over the past 4 years, and things that I haven't shared with our audience before, because there's been so much going on. If you listened to last week's episode, you heard some of the things that are going on in my personal life and things that I've been dealing with on a personal level. But there's so much to unpack and so much to share about One Girl Revolution because we just celebrated our 4-year anniversary, which is absolutely incredible. Never in a million years did I think that we would even make it to 4 years. I didn't really know where this story was leading. I still don't really know where One Girl Revolution goes from here, but there's so much to share and so many behind the scenes stories that I realized over the weekend when I spoke at this amazing conference, Behold and Beheld. There are so many stories that I haven't told before and I haven't told to our audience. So I wanted to use this opportunity to just kind of share from my own perspective about how One Girl Revolution started. If you listen to this podcast, you may have heard some of those elements before, but then where we've come, where we've gone from there, some of the behind the scenes stories about our Emmy nominated documentary, The Girl Inside, our newer documentary In Tandem, the podcast, so many things that we've accomplished over the past 4 years. And with Women's History Month, the theme is women who tell our stories. And I'm a firm believer, and really the heart of One Girl Revolution is all about encouraging women and girls to tell their stories in the way that they want. We create this space through our multimedia platform, through our nonprofit organization, to create the space for women to tell their authentic stories in the way that they want. And that's what I love so much about the podcast medium is you don't have the same specific parameters that you have in the media. You don't have 30 seconds to tell a story. We can take an hour. We could take hours. You know, there are podcasts that are out there that their episodes are a couple of hours long. Of course, with One Girl Revolution, we really try to keep it to the 45 minute realm. Sometimes it's a little less, sometimes it's a little more, just depending on the story. But we want to highlight these authentic stories. And so I sometimes need to take my own advice or take what I'm encouraging other women and say here in Women's History Month, women who tell our stories. I wanted to share just a little bit about my own story. If you're new here or you've never listened to the podcast before, or maybe you've caught a couple of episodes but never heard my own personal story, I'll share a little bit about that briefly, and then how One Girl Revolution started and some of these behind the scenes stories that I shared at the conference. And I realized as I was telling them that a lot of these stories I've never told before or told in this way, especially when you're going through things, sometimes you don't have the full view or the full perspective. And so I think over the past couple of years, my view of One Girl and the things that we've accomplished and even the things that I've experienced and how my life has changed through these different experiences, you know, going into Cook County Jail, the largest jail site in the US, spending time with these women. There's so much to unpack there and so many things that I haven't shared. And the documentary is only 10 minutes, but we spent an entire day with these amazing women. And of course, Dr. Laura Biaggi, the professor that you'll see in The Girl Inside. So I'll share a little bit just about how that came to be. But first, to just rewind and tell a little bit about my own story. I was born and raised in Michigan, one of 4 children. I'm the second oldest girl. So my parents used to joke when I was little that I was either going to be the dictator of a small nation or the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, because I really was the little boss. And my siblings will attest to that. My parents would tell you that even as a little kid, I was very opinionated. I had so much to say. I would rally my siblings to do great things, also to get in trouble. My brother Peter and I used to get in trouble all the time, and usually I was the ringleader. So I was this feisty little kid, and even at a very young age, I was full of opinions about the world and things that I thought, and I would be very vocal. Then I go to school. So I start school, at 5 years old, go to kindergarten, and in first grade, I just stopped talking. So I went from this feisty, vibrant little kid to being almost totally silent. I became a different person. And thankfully, I have the parents that I do, and they were asking questions and trying to figure out what was going on, because they were even recognizing changes in me when I would come home from school. And what they ended up figuring out is I was being bullied at school. My story is not unlike anyone else's. We all probably have dealt with bullies at some point, but I was born with a really rare immune deficiency called Job syndrome. So Job from the Old Testament suffered greatly. And so people with Job syndrome suffer greatly with all kinds of skin conditions and different immune issues and health issues. And when my youngest sister also has it, Delia, and when we were diagnosed, I was 4 years old, there were only 25 documented cases in the world. Today, there are only 250 cases. So it's very rare, but 2 of the cases are in our family. And so how Job syndrome manifested itself in me is I had terrible, terrible eczema from a very young age. So while I had terrible eczema, I still was this vibrant, happy, joyful little kid. But then once I got into school, kids started realizing that I looked different, and they started making me feel like I looked different. Now, my parents never made my siblings and I ever feel like we were different, or if we were, that was the thing that set us apart. That was the thing that was unique about us. That was the thing that made us special. Really, the whole idea of we are as unique as our fingerprint, which is true, that every single person has a purpose. Every single person has a unique imprint that they're meant to leave on this world. And if we really believed that, we would see all of our differences as something beautiful, something exciting, something that just set us apart in a good way from people. And so my parents started realizing that I was being bullied, and my mom decided that I needed something unique to do, something that made me feel special. So whether it was dance class or art classes or karate, something that was my magic feather. If you've watched Dumbo, you know that Dumbo flies because he has this magic feather. He probably always could have, but he needed this magic feather to really recognize that he had the power. And so my mom ended up enrolling me into Irish dancing. It was long before the days of river dance, and she thought if I could just have something special that I was doing, something that I was excited about, something that made me feel like I had something unique to say or share, or in the talent shows to do that was unique and special, that might help me deal with all of the pressure and all of the bullying and all of the things that I was dealing with at school. I did not want to go to Irish dancing. I kicked and screamed and cried, Mom, please don't make me go. And my mom finally said, if you just go for 4 dance lessons. If you go for 4 dance lessons and you don't like it, you don't have to go anymore. Well, of course, I go, love it, and ended up Irish dancing for 18 years until I went to college. And that was my magic feather. That was the thing that brought back my spark, brought back the little girl, this feisty little girl that I always was, opinionated, and I've progressively become more and more of that little girl the older that I've gotten. And I've always been a person who strives to stand on principle, someone who strives to stand up for what I believe in, and anyone who knows me can attest to that. But I think it kind of sparks back to that little girl that felt unseen, unheard, forgotten about, marginalized. And I think we all can have those moments in our life where we feel like we don't matter, or no one cares, or no one's listening. And I didn't know at the time when I started One Girl Revolution that was really probably the spark moment. I ask a lot of times on the podcast, what was the spark moment that led to you starting this organization or starting this movement or doing the thing that you do? What was there a spark moment? And that was my spark moment, but I didn't know it when I started One Girl Revolution. But as I've gone through things over the past 4 years, I've come to that realization that the things that I went through even as a child led me on this path to founding One Girl Revolution. So fast forward, there's a lot of things that happened in my life, in my adult life, my career. I worked in PR and media. I won't go into all of that, but I ended up deciding to start One Girl Revolution in 2019 is when I got the idea for it. Shortly before that, I kept having this One Girl Revolution just became a thing in my head, and I don't even know where it came from. I know there's a Christian song, One Girl Revolution, that a lot of times people point to, which I remember hearing when I was like a teenager, but that wasn't it. There was I just kept thinking about the power of one and how we have the power to change the world through our lives. And if every woman really believed in her power, that our voices matter and that our lives matter, that we can make an impact, how differently we would live our lives, how differently the world would look if we all believed that. And so One Girl Revolution was something that I had kind of been, I guess, thinking about since 2018, kind of throughout 2018, like, what is One Girl Revolution? What could it be? Is it a school program? Is it, something where I go and speak at schools and talk to girls about their value and their purpose and the power that they have to change the world? Or is it something else? I mean, I was going through all these different ideas. Is it a book? Is it some other sort of program? Is it a coaching program, right? There's so many coaching programs out there. And I just didn't feel like I landed on what One Girl Revolution was supposed to be. All these little puzzle pieces started kind of falling into my lap or falling into my room, and I started putting them together. So through my work in PR and media, I had really been experiencing for years the fact that oftentimes women's voices are not heard. Or I would see women do interviews and they would be cut down to 30 seconds. And it wouldn't be any part of the story that they wanted to tell. It was whatever the news organization or the reporter or editor thought was the most interesting snippet of whatever this woman said. And I kept seeing that happen and just started realizing that a lot of stories weren't being told because they weren't political, or that women are so often politicized when it comes to the media, and everything is divisive. I feel like, from my experience, everything is dividing women and separating us, us versus them, this mentality of like, you're either on the left or you're on the right, or you support this person or you don't support that person. Like, everything is divisive. So I started recognizing that and realizing that there needed to be a space where women could come together. And of course, there have been movements throughout, we'll say, the past 30 years that have claimed to be a space for women to tell their stories. And almost always you can point to the fact that there are women that are segregated out of whatever the event is, whatever the situation is. And so I wanted to create a space where no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, that your voice would be heard and that you were seen, that I looked at your face and didn't make judgments about who I thought you were, but I actually listened to the words that were coming out of your mouth. I actually wanted to hear from you specifically about your story. And so here all these things are happening with the media, and I'm kind of putting the puzzle pieces together. Okay, like, there needs to be a space for women's voices to be heard. I don't really know what that looks like. And I'm stumbling upon all of these inspiring stories of women and girls on social media, or I'd read a newspaper article, or my mom would send me some random story she saw on the evening news. And I started kind of putting together, like, these are stories of women and girls that are inspiring to me. Some of them had been covered by the media, but some of these women had never told their stories before. So the summer of 2018, I moved back to Michigan, left my cushy PR job in DC, and moved back to Michigan and didn't know what I was going to do. I was kind of picking up PR contract work to pay my bills. And I was reading a book about the city of Detroit, and I stumbled upon the part of the book where they talked about the two phrases that are in Latin on Detroit's flag. And I've seen Detroit's flag so many times, and I actually studied Latin in college, so it's interesting that I never took the time to actually pay attention to the two phrases. And it really is Detroit's motto, and it is, there is always hope and it will rise from the ashes. There is always hope and it will rise from the ashes. The moment that I read those two phrases, the summer of 2018, a light bulb went off, and I was like, that's it. I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to create a multimedia platform. It always had a visual element. It wasn't just a podcast. It had all these different elements of ways to tell women's stories: photos, social media, a podcast, documentaries, a documentary series. And that was my full vision the moment I read those two phrases, because there are so many stories of women are so resilient, and so stories of survival, stories of overcoming adversity, stories of women who have been through hell and back. And there is always hope, somehow in the midst of all of this darkness and difficulty. Women find some beacon of hope, some little glimmer of hope and light, and they fight for it. They work towards it. And then it will rise from the ashes. These women that have been through hell and back, they stand up, rise up, and nothing can get them down. And I just was like, that's it. That's what I need to do. I need to start this platform. And the way that I decided to start it was through a podcast, because in my mind, I thought, oh, that's the easiest thing. Greatest thing I did was start as a podcast, because even in the midst of the COVID pandemic, when everything shut down, I still could put out podcast episodes. I still was able to interview people via Zoom. And that's really how we've continued to do most of our interviews, is virtually. I still meet up from time to time. We'll be able to do an interview in person, but we were able to continue because of that virtual element, because it was a podcast and we weren't doing documentaries yet or any of that kind of stuff. But I started as a podcast because I thought it would be the easiest thing. If anybody has ever tried to do a podcast, you know that that is wrong, and it is not. It's not the easiest thing. It's still a lot of work, but I started with 10 episodes. I thought if I did 10 episodes of the podcast, that would be 10 stories of women that either hadn't been heard or hadn't been heard in this way. And that was something that I could contribute to this world. And so I started with 10 episodes. 10 episodes turned into 20. 20 turned into 30, and we went on from there. Now we are here at the 169th episode of the podcast, which is absolutely mind-blowing, because looking back, had I known that it would be so much work, had I known that it was going to take so much time, years, all this thing, like, I don't know that I would do it. But looking back, I'm so proud of every single episode. I'm so proud of every single woman and girl that's been featured on this podcast for sharing their heart, sharing their life, sharing their story, and continuing to do the work that they're doing. I mean, these women are absolutely changing the world every single day. I hope that they inspire me. I've learned so much from every single woman that's been on the podcast. I go back and listen to episodes that I've already heard a couple of times, a bunch of times, some of them, because these women inspire me and they challenge me to be better. They challenge me to see my value, to see my purpose, to see that I can make a difference even in the little things. You know, you don't have to start an organization to make a difference. You don't have to start some big movement. You can make a difference through every little thing that you do. And so it started as a podcast. It started small, and then, it's grown from there. And then somewhere in the midst of the first couple of months of the podcast, my friend Rob, who's absolutely amazing, from Behold in Chicago, Rob and Jason, I went to meet up with them in Chicago. I went to go see their studio, and they said, hey, we love what you're doing. We see what you're doing with One Girl Revolution. So cool. There need to be more spaces for women's authentic voices and stories to be told. You're doing that through the podcast. We know you have no funding. So if you ever come across a story that you feel like needs to be told on film, let us know, and if we think that it could, be a collaboration, that we could help you out with it, we would love to collaborate in some capacity. I'm not even kidding you that 2 days later, I heard about this story. Dr. Laura Biaggi, who was a professor at DePaul University in Chicago, and she taught a storytelling class in Cook County Jail. And she taught to everybody, but there was a distinct focus on women and women's voices and women's stories. So I called Rob and Jason up 2 days later, and I said, hey, I found this professor who teaches a storytelling class. Storytelling as a healing art was what the class was called. And I said, can we film this? Like, I think this would be amazing. And they laughed about it, because they were like, you're never going to get an entire film crew, all of these pointy objects, all these cameras and gear and all the things that we need. You're never going to get that into Cook County Jail. So if you can, we're game. We'd love to do it, but I don't think we're ever going to be able to do that. And so I said, let's go. And I figured it out. And it took me 9 months to get clearance to go into Cook County Jail. I had to jump over every single bit of red tape you can imagine. I talked to everybody from the sheriff's office to the PR team to, sometimes it felt like I was even talking to the doorman, trying to just figure out a way to get in. And we did things that never in a million years would I've ever fathomed that we would have been able to do, even something as simple as bringing pens in. So as we were talking about this class and this course and the professor, we wanted to do a one-day revisit of this class with any of her former students that wanted to come and attend. And then as a part of that, they knew that there was going to be a film crew and that there was going to be filming involved. So they, of course, had to sign off on that. But 5 women showed up, and we didn't even know who was going to show up or what their stories were going to be, or if they would be willing to talk to us or not. If we were going to walk in the room and they were going to have their arms crossed and just mum is the word, like they're not talking to us, or if they would be open and willing and listen and speak and share their stories. And so one of the things, as we were first talking about Cook County Jail, I had this vision for pens. I wanted writing. I wanted these women to have, for 2 reasons. Obviously, the visual of it. I think there's something so beautiful about writing in general, but also like on film, having that visual. But secondarily, we didn't know exactly where this documentary was going to go, or if it would even become a documentary. Because again, if people aren't willing to share their stories, One Girl goes nowhere. There's nothing. There's no documentary if people aren't willing to speak. And so this platform, this entire platform, the documentaries, the podcast, really exists because women have had the courage, women have had the strength to tell their stories, to walk us through their stories. And so we didn't know walking into Cook County Jail what was going to happen on that day. So it takes 9 months. We get clearance to go. We walk up to the gates. And even then, it was not the easiest thing. We had to go through layers and layers and layers of security. We had to have a list of every single thing that we were taking in, the number of pens, the numbers of pieces of paper we had. And, I didn't know what we were going to get into, but we walk into this room and right off the bat, I knew that something special was about to happen, because Dr. Biaggi's standing there and the 5 women walk in, and you see this in the documentary, The Girl Inside. The 5 women walk in and start jumping up and down and screaming and picking Dr. Biaggi up and spinning her around. And I thought, this is it. Like, this is the power of this multimedia platform to create the space for women to tell their stories. And I knew that those 5 women were all of our lives were going to be changed that day, but those 5 women were going to change the world in that day through whatever was about to happen. And so we walk in and Dr. Biaggi does all her vocal exercises with them, and we talk about, I share about One Girl Revolution and how it started and really what I'm trying to accomplish through this platform and the power of our stories. And we didn't talk about what they did to end up in Cook County. That's always a question that people ask. And that was one of the biggest bits of feedback that I got from people when The Girl Inside came out, is everybody wanted to know more about the women. And I was like, okay, more like what way? They wanted to know what they did to end up in Cook County Jail. But to me, that was never important. And that's the thing, is I never want to put women in boxes when it comes to this podcast. And I really hope that this can be an example to the rest of the world, the rest of the culture, that every single day we put people in boxes. We look at somebody and we make a judgment about who they are as a person, where they come from, what their life is like. We do that to ourselves as well. We put ourselves in boxes where I'm not worthy enough, or I'm not good enough, or I can't do that. That's not for me. And the reality is sometimes we have to just step up to the plate, and we are good enough. We are enough. And we need to stop being so hard on ourselves. We need to stop being so hard on other people. And so I just saw these women. I looked in their faces and I saw myself in them, sitting in the circle, talking about One Girl Revolution. And the thing that was so interesting to me is the one word that they latched onto was girl. And I think in a lot of ways, that's how the documentary ended up becoming what it was, and also being called The Girl Inside, because it was the girl inside of each and every one of us. Who is this little girl that was feisty and joyful and happy, and like myself, even going through some really difficult things, health issues as a child, and still being so joyful and happy, and then something happened in life that tore me down and brought me down and helped me feel made me feel marginalized and forgotten about and ignored. These women are exactly that. They're in Cook County Jail, and so many people in our culture, in our world, are like, oh, they deserve to be there. And like, we put people in jail and prison and we forget about them. And there's so much to unpack there, and I'm not going to get into it, but if you want to hear more about what we've done with incarceration and women, because women are the fastest growing population in jail and prison, I think there's a lot to talk about there. We've done a lot of work on the podcast, and so go back and listen to our incarceration and women series. There's 10 episodes, totally different stories. It'll open your eyes. But I just remember being in that room with these women and seeing myself in them and thinking, we're all one step away from Cook County. You think about the people that you were raised with or the family you were raised in, and so many different choices that we make on a daily basis. It can change the trajectory of our entire lives, and not only our lives, but generations and generations to come. And that's what I think is so important to recognize about the power of women, that when we get our lives back on track, even if we feel like we aren't doing the thing that we want to be doing, or we don't have the job we want to be doing, or maybe we're in a bad relationship or a bad situation, we have the power to change that. And when we make a decision to change that, it doesn't just change our lives, it changes the lives of generations and generations to come, our children, our children's children, and that's the power that we have. So just back to the women in Cook County Jail, they were so inspiring and so beautiful, and the stories that they tell, which a lot of them you can see in The Girl Inside. It's only 10 minutes on YouTube. Check it out. We got nominated for an Emmy for it, which is so amazing. But these women just told these stories that changed my life, changed my heart. And back to the pens, how I was talking about how important it was for me to bring pens in. It was the visual, of course, but also we didn't know where this was going to go. And I wanted each of the women to have something tangible to take away with them. To say, remember that day that this random film crew, even if it never got released, even if it was just became this exercise of us sitting around and learning how to use our voices and tell our stories, if that's all it became, these women would have a piece of paper to walk away with. And so we left Cook County Jail that day and hugged the women, and they still are just so much a part of my life. One of them has since reached out to me through One Girl Revolution because of privacy issues. I wasn't able to stay in touch with them, but they're also, of course, welcome to reach out to One Girl Revolution. And so, I've been able to stay in touch with one of them, and she's been on the podcast. So I encourage you to go back and listen to that. That's in our Incarceration and Women series. But I remember leaving Cook County that day and just being blown away, and I still get choked up thinking about it, how powerful and amazing these women are. And that's the power of every single woman, no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter what you're going through, no matter what you've experienced, no matter if you're sitting behind bars in Cook County Jail or you're sitting on the floor in your bedroom crying because you don't know like where to go from here, or you're struggling, or you're dealing with depression or other issues. You have so much light and so much power and so much, you're just a beacon of hope to this world. And I wish and hope and pray that every single woman sees that power. So that's just a little bit about The Girl Inside. Again, I encourage everybody to watch it. It's on YouTube. If you've already seen it, go back and watch it. I watch it on a regular basis because these women inspire me, and they open my eyes to my own power, my own value, and they challenge me to be a better version of myself every single day. And so I encourage you to watch that. The second documentary that we did was in tandem. And what's interesting about that is we started filming in tandem in March of 2019. So I had found out about Caitlin Cullen's story. I think she's so amazing. She opened up a restaurant in one of the worst neighborhoods in Milwaukee, and she would hire people that no one else would hire. So pregnant women, people coming out of jail and prison, kids that were being targeted by drug dealers, and she would give them a chance and thought, if I could pay them $20 to run an errand for me or do a delivery or wash some dishes, that might be the thing that helps get their life back on track, or that might be the one thing that helps them pay their bill put food on the table for their family or pay their energy bill or whatever is going on in their life. And so I thought her story was so amazing, how she was using her restaurant to make a social impact. And so we filmed in March 2019, and The Girl Inside was filmed a couple months later in November of 2019. So we started filming in tandem first. And then things happened with Cook County, and they wanted us to get the Girl Inside out quickly because it was in the middle of the pandemic and nobody was wearing masks when we filmed, of course, because we didn't even know that COVID was about to hit, which is also such an interesting thing to me, that we happened to film at the perfect time. So we filmed at the Tandem in March 2019 and filmed pretty much everything. We did the whole story, how amazing this social enterprise restaurant is, what Caitlin's done, interviewed different people that benefited from the work that she's doing, and then we were set to go back and film some B-roll in March 2020, and then, as we all know, the world shut down. So we never made it back to the Tandem for our B-roll in March 2020, but something even more interesting happened. And I remember watching it unfold on social media, because that's how a lot of these stories too come to fruition, is I see something on social media, or I watch a story or watch something happening unfold before my very eyes, and I'm like, that's a story that needs to be told through One Girl Revolution. I want to capture it. I'm seeing little glimpses of something that's happening because somebody is sharing on social media, but I want to capture that full story. And so I started seeing posts from Caitlin and from the Tandem during the height of the pandemic that they had shut down their restaurant in March 19th or 20th, 2020. And they started posting about how they had meals, restaurant quality, delicious, beautiful meals for free. And you just had to show up at the restaurant, tell them how many meals you needed, and they would give them to you, no questions asked. And so I saw that kind of popping up, and they were asking for monetary donations. They were asking for donations to make more meals. And so I'm watching this build and build and build. Well, what ends up happening is Caitlin and everybody at the Tandem, they're making meals, but then they start partnering with other restaurants around the city of Milwaukee to make meals. And on a daily basis, they had these menus that they would post, and you could order as many meals as you needed for free, no questions asked, and then pick them up. Well, then winter hit and there were difficulties there, people getting to the restaurant, especially elderly people or people with children being able to get to the restaurant, or people that just didn't have mass transit access and couldn't get there. And Uber still wasn't going around at that point. So there was a difficulty there. So Caitlin started hiring Uber drivers or former Uber drivers to deliver these meals. And then she was doing so much great work that the city of Milwaukee recognized what she was doing and gave her a $350,000 grant to pay the restaurants, to pay these people that were stepping in. And she ended up saving so many people's livelihood. I mean, she was hiring people that had been laid off by the restaurants that had closed. She was able to pay them for the meals that they were getting. There was so much going on, and they're just hustling. And I'm watching all this unfold on social media, and I was like, bingo, like bing, bing, bing. This is the story. I thought this story was just the restaurant. No, there's a whole nother side to this story. There's a whole nother flip side to what's going on, because what Caitlin and all these restaurants and individuals in the city of Milwaukee ended up doing is feeding 115,000 people during the pandemic. That is absolutely mind-blowing. And the way that they did it is they did it by just doing what they know. They know how to make food. They know how to run a restaurant. They, of course, had to deal with how to pay for things. And I know that there were times that they really struggled to keep this program going, but they did. And then they got support from the city, which is amazing. And so what we ended up doing is going back in March of 2021, so almost 2 years later, went back and filmed the B-roll that we needed, but then filmed this whole other side of the story. We ended up filming the whole pandemic side of the story. And so what In Tandem, which is our second documentary, ended up becoming is the first part of the documentary is all about the story of Caitlin in the restaurant, of course. And then everything shuts down March 2020 and then goes into the pandemic story, the COVID story, how they ended up feeding 115,000 people. And I think that was the story that always needed to be told. But had we just rushed to get it out in March of 2019, we wouldn't have maybe been able to cover the second part of the story. And so that's In Tandem. That's just a little bit about that story, but it didn't come out until May of 2022. So that documentary was actually 3 years in the making, which is crazy to think about. So much happened. So much happened in our world in those 3 years, but so much happened in those 3 years. But sometimes the story, you just have to be patient. And you could say that, I could say that's a metaphor for all of our own lives, that sometimes you don't know where your story is leading or where your life is leading. And sometimes you just have to be patient and watch it unfold. So that's In Tandem. Of course, the podcast has continued going, and I can't wait to see where One Girl goes from here. So, One Girl started as the podcast, but like I said, I've always had this big vision for One Girl Revolution to be a multimedia platform. My hope and dream is that the podcast will continue because I think it's such a great outlet for us to be able to connect with so many women across the country. And, I don't have to be in their neighborhood or even sitting next to them to interview them. I can interview them from anywhere. So that's been great. I have big hopes and dreams for the podcast. I have so many great episodes that are coming. Like I said, next week we will be back with another One Girl Revolution story. We will be back to the usual ways of doing things. But today on International Women's Day, I wanted to do a special episode where I just kind of shared a little bit about what's been going on with One Girl Revolution and how we've evolved over 4 years. It's crazy to think about even Caitlin's documentary In Tandem, that it took us 3 years, and it was 3 years of this 4-year journey. And I can't wait to see where we go from here. I am continuing the podcast. I want to continue to do documentaries. My big hope and dream, which this is a spoiler alert for everybody who's listening, and just between us, that the next documentary that I want to do is Detroit focused. I already have the vision for it. I already know how I want to do it, how One Girl Revolution wants to do it. It will be different from the other two documentaries. And that's one thing that I love so much about how we've done these documentaries is The Girl Inside and In Tandem. There are, of course, threads to the stories that connect them. And I think that's all women, right? Like, there are so many threads that connect us, but they're also very different stories. They're also told in a very different way. And if you haven't seen both of them, watch them. And I would love to hear your thoughts and your perspectives on both. But we really strive to tell those stories in the most authentic way with regards to the woman or women that we were telling their story. And so that's why they're different. And I just love that. And I would even say that about the podcast. There's a different vibe to every single episode. Like, I never really go into the episode knowing what I'm going to get. I, of course, go into it with questions and ideas and thoughts. And, I love reading about these women before I do the podcast, but then really just giving them the space to tell me about their story and being open and listen. And so every podcast is kind of different in that way. But the Detroit documentary, not to give too much away, but it will focus on the city of Detroit. It will highlight the city of Detroit, the grit, the beauty, the motto of Detroit. It will rise from the ashes and there is always hope. I think that that's a big thing that I want to focus on with the documentary, but also it won't just focus on one woman's story. It will focus on numerous women's stories. So that's a little spoiler alert for all of you, but right now I'm working on getting funding for that. I'm working on grant proposals, and this year one of my big goals is to get fundraising going for our nonprofit organization. So One Girl Revolution, when I started it, I just sort of started as a multimedia platform. I never wanted it to be a for-profit necessarily, unless it was going to be funding the nonprofit side of things, and funding education and support. And, I have big hopes and dreams for One Girl Revolution to really be a PR and media support for the women and causes that we highlight. But that's down the road a little bit. But we've stayed in touch with all the women who have been on the podcast and really strive to support them and their causes throughout the years. And I hope that as we continue to grow and as we continue to build this platform and this organization, that we'll be able to support women in new and exciting ways. So this year, one of my big goals is to fundraise for the nonprofit. And so I would ask all of you to consider, if you listen to this podcast or you've watched our documentaries, I would ask you to consider supporting the nonprofit. You can go to either of our websites, the number onegirlrevolution.com or onegirlrevolution.org, so onegirlrevolution.org. On both of those sites, you can become a monthly donor. You can also just give a one-time gift. But this platform, this podcast, these documentaries, of course, I've had amazing people like Behold that have poured their finances, their resources, their time, their talents into this. And I've had many friends who have stepped up to the plate and supported this and helped One Girl become what it is. But this has hugely been self-funded because I believe so deeply in One Girl Revolution, and that this is a critical space for women's stories and their voices to be heard. So with that being said, I would be so grateful for any contributions that any of you could make to our nonprofit this coming year. And maybe you can't do that now. And there are so many other ways that you can support One Girl Revolution, which works too. But I encourage you to keep One Girl Revolution and our nonprofit organization in mind. I know that a lot of organizations and companies, they also will give contributions from their employees. So if there's some sort of situation like that, we're so grateful for every single dollar, and every single dollar goes right back into the work that we're doing. I am not an employee, and there are no employees with One Girl Revolution, and so everything that you contribute goes right back into the work that we're doing and will allow us to grow the platform, grow the documentaries and other things that we want to do. There are free ways that you can support our work. Follow us on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Both of our documentaries and all of our podcast episodes are up on YouTube. Subscribe to the One Girl Revolution podcast. You can listen to it anywhere. Share the episodes too. If you listen to an episode and you really enjoy it, please share it, because same with the documentaries, same with everything that we're doing. Also, please share our donate page. Like, if you can, share it on your social media, because you never know. People are always looking for ways to contribute. Sometimes it's their time and talent, but sometimes people are just looking, they have $20 burning a hole in their pocket. $20 can do so much for us here at One Girl Revolution, and it just helps us continue to keep this platform going. And so we're grateful for every single share, every single way that you share our work, every single way that you spread the word about One Girl Revolution. But today, on International Women's Day, and again, as we continue to celebrate Women's History Month this month, there's so much going on with One Girl Revolution. Like I said, I shared that I spoke at a conference over the weekend, and last night we spoke at Rebel Nell's incredible International Women's Day event. Tonight we have the Detroit Red Wings Women's History Night, which is going to be incredible. We'll be sharing about it on social media, so check it out. But the theme of Women's History Month is women who tell our stories. And I just want to leave all of you with that. I've shared a little bit about my story in this podcast episode. I've shared a little bit about the behind the scenes things that have been going on with One Girl Revolution. And I hope to continue to share more. And I will try to be better about sharing more, because I never started One Girl Revolution to be the face of it. But I know that it's also so important for me to take my own advice, and for all of us to take this advice, that when we stand up, when we speak up, when we share our stories, when we share our own experiences, when we share the things that we've been through or we're going through, we give other women the space. We give other women the courage. We give other women the clarity and passion and vigor to stand up and share their stories. And so when one woman speaks up, there's that great quote. There's a great quote just about how, when one woman stands up, an army stands up around her. And I think that there are probably numerous quotes out there like that, because I know there are a lot of quotes that encourage women to speak up and stand up and share their stories. But I just want to encourage each and every one of you, no matter who you are, no matter what you're going through, use your voice, tell your story. You have a purpose. Look at your fingerprint. I need to remind myself of this every single day. Look at your fingerprint, and you are as unique as your fingerprint. Your story is as unique as your fingerprint. Your purpose is as unique as your fingerprint. You have a purpose, and you have an impact, an imprint that you can leave on this world that no one else can. And so I just want to encourage each and every one of you to speak up, to share your stories, and remember every single day that you have the power to change the world through your life. Happy International Women's Day. Happy Women's History Month. And I hope that we continue with this excitement, with this passion that we have on this great day of International Women's Day. And then throughout this great month, every single day should be Women's History Day, because women are making history every single day. And so I hope that we can all continue through One Girl Revolution, through our own stories, through the women and girls that we know that are changing the world every single day. I hope that we can continue to celebrate women's history every single day, uplift one another, and stand up and take our rightful place in this world to be the world-changing women that we are. For more information on One Girl Revolution, check out onegirlrevolution.com. That's the number onegirlrevolution.com.